The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, Fox News primetime with former President Trump, family business transparency. Jasmine Crockett received the email at 7 a.m. By 7:15, she was loading documents into 3 folders, each tabbed with precision, suggesting months of preparation. This was not a debate whatsoever. It was an execution. Trump arrived 45 minutes early, which was unusual but expected by those who knew him. He needed the room to himself first. He needed to own the space. The makeup artist later described his mood as expansive, almost celebratory. He talked about ratings, about dominating the news cycle, about congressional Democrats finally sending him worthy opponents. He filled every corner of the room with total confidence. He waved off the producers completely. He knew television perfectly. Then Crockett walked into the studio, and something in his face changed. Confusion, not fear yet. She was younger than expected. She was carrying too much. 3 folders, a laptop, an iPad with a spreadsheet open. The confusion lasted 4 seconds before it transformed into something familiar. Dismissive contempt wrapped in performative courtesy. He stood when she entered, which was calculated. The camera loved those moments. Presidential behavior, respectful to the opposition, but his eyes were already moving past her, scanning her materials with suggesting he was mentally cataloging what he would say about her preparedness versus his effortless command of facts. When they shook hands for the camera, he held the grip 2 seconds longer than necessary, smiling directly into the lens. The message was clear to anyone watching from home. He was comfortable, she was nervous, and this would be over quickly. The moderator framed it. Congressional investigations had raised questions about transparency and conflicts of interest. Trump's opening went 8 minutes, 42 seconds, 3 minutes over. He spoke about the greatest economy in American history. Jobs returning from China, manufacturing facilities opening in forgotten districts, trade deals he alone had negotiated. He spoke about his children building businesses that employed thousands, about the Trump family representing American entrepreneurial spirit. He spoke about witch hunts and partisan investigations. He spoke about fake news and rigged systems and his unprecedented transparency. He never once mentioned specific numbers. He never cited a single document. He didn't need to. His supporters already believed him, his opponents already hated him, and everyone in between had stopped caring about details years ago. At least that's what he believed. Crockett sat perfectly still throughout the entire performance, her hands folded on the table in front of her, her expression neutral to the point of absence. She was not taking notes. She was not reacting. She was simply waiting. The camera cut to her twice during Trump's opening, and both times she looked like someone sitting in a waiting room, expecting to be called for an appointment she had scheduled months ago. When the moderator finally turned to her for her response, she thanked him with a politeness that felt almost alien in the context of what had just happened. Then she opened the first folder with the deliberate care of someone who knows that what comes next will be permanent. Her voice, when she began speaking, was quiet, not uncertain. Quiet in the way that forces a room to lean forward to hear. She started by acknowledging something Trump had said about jobs and economic growth. She agreed that manufacturing employment was an important metric. Then she said that since President Trump had raised the subject of his family's business contributions to the American economy, she wanted to make sure the American people had complete information about those contributions, because transparency, as he had just said, was something he valued deeply. The tone was so respectful that it took Trump a full 3 seconds to realize he was about to be eviscerated. She said that she had spent the last 6 months working with the House Oversight Committee reviewing financial disclosures, banking records, and corporate filings related to Trump family business entities. She said this not as an accusation, but as a simple statement of fact, the way someone might mention they had been reading a particular book. Then she placed a single document on the table between them, positioning it so the camera could see the official Treasury Department seal in the header. It was a FinCEN report. Trump's lawyer, sitting in the front row of the studio audience, went completely rigid. Crockett said that this report, filed under the Bank Secrecy Act, documented a series of suspicious activity reports filed by Deutsche Bank regarding transactions involving Don Jr.'s real estate acquisition company between 2017 and 2019. She said the total flagged amount was $47 million. Not 46, not 50, $47 million. The precision was not accidental. She said that these transactions had been flagged because the funding sources could not be adequately documented, the business purpose could not be verified, and the movement of money through shell corporations in 3 different countries triggered every single algorithmic warning that banks use to detect money laundering. She said all of this in the same calm, measured tone someone might use to read a grocery list. Then she looked directly at Trump and said that she wanted to give him an opportunity to explain these transactions before she moved to the next folder. The silence that followed was extraordinary. Not because Trump was thinking, he was not thinking. His face was doing something that faces do when the brain behind them is trying to process information that fundamentally does not fit the narrative it had prepared. He opened his mouth. Nothing came. He closed it. His hand moved toward the microphone as if he were about to speak, then stopped halfway. The moderator, sensing that dead air on live television was approaching dangerous territory, started to interject, but Crockett raised one finger. Not rudely, just a small gesture that somehow commanded the entire room, and the moderator stopped. 5 seconds, 10, 15. The only sound in the studio was the faint mechanical whir of the cameras repositioning. Trump's lawyer was now leaning forward with both hands gripping the armrests of his chair, his face communicating silently that his client needed to say absolutely nothing until they could speak privately. But Trump was not looking at his lawyer. He was staring at the document on the table, at the Treasury seal, at the page numbers visible in the bottom right corner, suggesting this was page 1 of something much longer. Finally, he spoke. He said that his son's businesses were completely separate from his own, that he had no involvement in day-to-day operations, that this was exactly the kind of partisan fishing expedition he had been talking about, and that if Congresswoman Crockett had real evidence of wrongdoing, she should present it to the appropriate authorities instead of ambushing him on television. It was a competent deflection. It would have worked in almost any other context. But Crockett had not ambushed anyone. She had simply accepted an invitation to appear on national television with a man who had spent a decade claiming that his family's business dealings were beyond reproach, and she had brought receipts. She said that she appreciated his answer and that she wanted to be very clear that she was not accusing anyone of criminal activity. She was simply presenting documented facts that the American people had a right to know, particularly since President Trump had made his family's business acumen a cornerstone of his political identity. Then she opened the second folder. This one was thicker. The tab read, Comparative Analysis Trump Organization, Revenue Claims versus Documented Income 2017-2021. She said that President Trump had frequently stated, both during his presidency and after, that his businesses had thrived, that his brand had never been stronger, that the Trump Organization was a model of American success. She said she wanted to test that claim against publicly available data. She pulled out a spreadsheet, turned her iPad toward the camera, and walked through a line-by-line comparison. The Trump Organization had claimed in a 2018 financial disclosure that Trump Tower Chicago was generating $12 million annually in condo sales and rental income. Cook County property records showed actual revenue of $4.1 million. Trump National Doral had been valued in financial statements at over $200 million. The resort had posted losses in 4 of the 5 years between 2017 and 2021, and its last independent appraisal, conducted for refinancing purposes, had valued it at $93 million. Trump International Hotel Washington, which the former president had described as one of the most successful hotels in the country, had lost more than $70 million during his presidency and had been sold in 2022 for $375 million, nearly $200 million less than the valuation listed in his final financial disclosure. Crockett did not editorialize. She did not call him a liar. She simply read numbers from 2 columns, what Trump had said and what the documents showed. Every single line was sourced. County records, SEC filings, court-ordered appraisals, bank refinancing statements. The gap between the 2 columns was not a difference of opinion. It was a difference between mythology and mathematics. Trump tried 3 times to interrupt. The first time, he said that property values fluctuate and that any businessman knows that appraisals depend on market conditions. Crockett nodded as if this were a reasonable point and said that she completely agreed, which was why she had been careful to compare his claims not against market valuations, but against the actual revenue his properties had generated. as reported to the IRS and documented in property tax filings. The second time, he said that she was cherry-picking data and ignoring his successful properties. She said that she would be happy to review any property he wanted to highlight, and she asked if he would like her to pull up the financial performance of Trump Tower, New York, Trump National Golf Club, Bedminster, or Mar-a-Lago. He did not answer. The third time, he said that this was a gotcha ambush and that he had come here to talk about policy, not accounting. Crockett closed her iPad, folded her hands, and said that he had opened his statement by talking about his family's business success, so she was simply responding to the topic he had introduced. Then she said that if he preferred to move on, she was ready to do that, but she wanted to make one thing very clear first. She said that financial disclosure forms filed with the federal government are legal documents. Signing one is done under penalty of perjury. Knowingly inflating asset values on those forms is not a difference of opinion about market conditions. It is fraud, and it is a federal crime. She did not say that Trump had committed fraud. She said that the gap between his certified statements and the documented reality created questions that deserved answers, and that the American people were owed those answers from someone who had asked them to trust him with the presidency. The moderator tried to move to a commercial break. Crockett said she had one more document to present, and the moderator, who by this point had completely lost control of his own program, simply nodded. The third folder was the thinnest, but it was the one that mattered most. The tab read, Don Jr., Rosneft Payment Trail. Crockett said that in 2016, during the presidential campaign, Donald Trump Jr. had traveled to Moscow for what was publicly described as a real estate development meeting. What was not public at the time was that 3 weeks after that meeting, a shell company registered in Cyprus and controlled by an entity with documented ties to Rosneft, the Russian state oil company, had transferred $18.4 million to a holding company in Delaware that shared the same registered agent as Don Jr.'s real estate firm. She had the wire transfer records. She had the corporate registration documents from Cyprus showing the ownership chain. She had the Delaware filing showing the identical registered agent. She had an email obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request to the Treasury Department in which a compliance officer at Deutsche Bank had flagged the transaction and asked for documentation of the business purpose. The response from Don Jr.'s attorney had been that the payment was a consulting fee for services rendered. When the bank asked what services, the attorney said that the details were covered by a non-disclosure agreement. When the bank asked for the NDA, none was provided. The transaction was flagged, reported, and then, as far as Deutsche Bank was concerned, the matter had been referred to federal authorities. What happened after that, Crockett said, was a question she could not answer because the Treasury Department had declined to provide further records, citing an ongoing investigation that may or may not still be active. But what she could say was that $18.4 million had moved from a Russian state-owned enterprise to Donald Trump Jr., and that the only explanation ever provided was a consulting fee that no one could document. She placed the wire transfer record on the table next to the FinCEN report and the property analysis. Then she looked at Trump and asked a very simple question. She asked if he could explain what services his son had provided to Rosneft that were worth $18.4 million. The silence that followed was longer than the first one. Trump's face had gone from red to white to something in between that suggested every blood vessel in his head was making independent decisions about where to send oxygen. His hands were gripping the edge of the table. The moderator was staring at his own notes as if they might contain instructions for what to do when your live television program becomes a criminal referral. Trump's lawyer was now standing, one hand raised as if to physically stop what was happening, but there was nothing to stop. The question had been asked. It was now in the record. It was being broadcast to millions of people, and Trump had no answer. He said that his son's business dealings were private. Crockett said that $18 million from a foreign state enterprise to the son of a sitting president was not private. He said that this was a setup, that she had coordinated with his political enemies to destroy him. Crockett said that every document she had presented was publicly available through FOIA requests, property records, and banking disclosures, and that if he believed any of it was false, he was welcome to provide contradicting evidence. He said that he would not dignify this circus with a response. Crockett said that was his right. but that his refusal to answer would itself be part of the public record. Then something happened that no one in the studio had ever seen before. Trump stood up, ripped off his microphone, and walked toward the exit. Not quickly, not running, but the kind of purposeful exit that communicates that the person leaving believes they have just won by refusing to participate. He was wrong. The camera stayed on Crockett. She did not react to his departure. She did not call after him. She simply sat in her chair, her 3 folders still open on the table, the documents still visible to anyone watching at home. The moderator, in a voice that sounded like he was narrating his own career ending in real time, said that they would take a commercial break. Crockett said that before they did, she wanted to read one more thing into the record. She said that in 2016, Donald Trump had stood on a debate stage and said that not paying federal income taxes made him smart. She said that in 2020, the New York Times had reported that he had paid $750 in federal taxes in his first year as president. She said that in 2024, the American people had a right to know whether the business empire he had used to justify his qualifications for the presidency was built on documented success or documented fiction. She said that the documents she had presented tonight were not the complete picture. They were a fraction of what congressional oversight committees had uncovered. She said that full transparency would require President Trump to release his tax returns, to provide complete documentation of his business revenue, and to explain every transaction involving foreign entities that had interacted with his family during and after his presidency. She said that she was not asking for this because she opposed him politically. She was asking for it because the American people deserved to know the truth about the person who had asked for their trust. And then, in a voice that was somehow even quieter than it had been at the start, she said that she had come here tonight prepared to have an honest conversation about transparency and accountability. She said that President Trump had chosen to leave instead of answering a single question about documented financial transactions involving his son and a Russian state enterprise. She said that his absence spoke louder than anything she could say. The commercial break finally happened. When the program returned, Trump was gone. Crockett remained. The moderator, to his credit, asked if she wanted to respond to Trump's claim that this had been an ambush. She said that she had accepted the same invitation he had, that she had brought publicly available documents to support her questions, and that if asking a presidential candidate to explain $18 million from Russia was an ambush, then the word had lost all meaning. The rest of the program was a formality. Crockett answered questions from the moderator about the oversight process, about what happens when financial disclosures contain materially false information, about whether she believed this would lead to criminal referrals. She said that was not her decision to make. Her job was to present facts. What federal prosecutors did with those facts was up to them. But she wanted to be very clear about one thing. This was not about partisan politics. This was about math. You cannot claim $12 million in revenue when county records show 4. You cannot accept $18 million from a Russian state enterprise and call it a consulting fee with no documentation. You cannot certify financial disclosures under penalty of perjury and then have those disclosures contradicted by every independent source. This was not a political disagreement. This was the difference between what someone said and what actually happened. And in a functioning democracy, she said that difference matters. The video of Trump walking out went viral within 90 minutes. By morning, every major news network had replayed the moment when Crockett asked about the Rosneft payment, and Trump's face went blank. By noon, legal analysts were discussing whether the transactions she had presented constituted sufficient predication for a federal money laundering investigation. By evening, 3 separate congressional committees had announced that they were requesting full banking records from Deutsche Bank related to Trump family accounts. Trump, predictably, went to Truth Social and called Crockett a liar, a fraud, and a puppet of the deep state. He said that she had doctored documents, that the entire thing was a hoax, that he would be suing her and Fox News for defamation. None of that happened, because everything she had presented was real. The wire transfer was real. The FinCEN report was real. The property records were real, and everyone knew it, including him. 3 days after the broadcast, Don Jr. released a statement through his attorney saying that the Rosneft payment had been for consulting services related to energy infrastructure projects and that all transactions had been conducted in full compliance with U.S. law. He did not provide documentation. He did not name the projects. He did not explain why a real estate developer had been consulting on energy infrastructure for a Russian state oil company. The statement raised more questions than it answered, which meant it had accomplished nothing except confirming that the transactions Crockett had described were real. Jasmine Crockett did not gloat. She did not go on a victory tour. She returned to Congress and continued her work on the Oversight Committee as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But something had happened. She had taken a man who had spent a decade claiming that no one could touch him, that he was too smart and too powerful to be held accountable, and she had shown the entire country that his empire was built on claims that could not survive contact with documented reality. She had done it without raising her voice, without personal attacks, without theatrics. She had simply brought the receipts. And when he had no answer, when his only response was to walk away, she had let the silence speak for itself. That silence, counted in seconds that felt like hours, was the most devastating thing Donald Trump had ever experienced on television, because for once he had encountered someone who had done the homework, who could not be intimidated, and who understood that the most powerful weapon in politics is not rhetoric or charisma or television presence. It is the truth, documented and undeniable, presented by someone who refuses to let it be ignored. Crockett had brought 3 folders to that studio. Trump had brought bluster and bile and the absolute certainty that he could talk his way out of anything. He had been wrong, and the moment he realized that, the moment he understood that this woman had him cornered with evidence he could not explain away, his only option was flight. The camera had captured every second of it. The empty chair where he had been sitting, the 3 folders still open on the table, Jasmine Crockett, perfectly composed, saying that his refusal to answer was now part of the permanent record. "You questioned my qualifications when you walked into that studio," she had said in her closing statement. "You looked at me and assumed I was unprepared, that I was out of my depth, that you could dismiss me the way you've dismissed every woman who's ever challenged you. But, Mr. President, I'm not the one who walked out when the questions got difficult. I'm not the one who couldn't explain $18 million from Russia. I'm not the one whose financial disclosures contradict every independent record. I came here to ask questions that the American people deserve answers to. You came here assuming that your presence alone would be enough. It wasn't, and now everyone knows it."